Okay, Satan and deception. So, I believe that the dragon topic, the dinosaur topic, is one of the biggest deceptions out there. So we're going to... Alright, so starting off things, Revelation chapter 12, we're going to go to the end now. And some of the prophecy in Revelation points back to the beginning too. So exactly when this happened in the Bible doesn't explicitly explain specific timelines on this topic, but it gives us ballparks. My belief is that this happens between the beginning of creation and the creation of man, somewhere in that range. War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the dragon, this is the rebellion of Satan in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. That serpent of old, that's what gives us an indication that the serpent in the garden was Satan. Because you'll notice in Genesis, it never says that the serpent was Satan. We find this out a long time later when John wrote it to us. Okay? Okay, who deceives the whole world. This is going to be a big phrase right here. He deceives the whole world. This topic of dragons and dinosaurs is a huge deception. He was cast to the earth and his angels were cast out with him. So this is an illustration of that. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery dragon having 7 heads and 7 horns and 7 diadems on its heads. His tail threw a third of the stars of heaven, angels, and threw them to the earth. So we've got a massive rebellion in heaven. And a third of the angels end up part of this rebellion, and they end up being cast out because of Satan's work. Okay? So this is the satanic rebellion. So there's a tremendous demonic power. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. They fight against principalities and powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age. The world now lies under the sway of the wicked one. That's why there's so much pain, so much deception, so much lies, so much sin. So it's a pretty frightening scene that's seen in the beginning of Revelation there. Have you ever seen these goofy illustrations of demons wearing pitchforks and little forked tails? And yeah. They are not at all like that. They are very powerful beings that are unseen. And Satan actually disguises himself as an angel of light. Says that he's one of the most beautiful out there. So, imagine the most beautiful, enticing thing. That's Satan. Satan is very good at making himself appear beautiful. Okay. If you forget anything else, remember this. The number one thing the dragon, or Satan, wants to do, he deceives the world. He wants to make his ways look like God's ways. Ever since the beginning, that's what he's done. He's going to make his ways look like God's ways. So Peter gives us warning, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, your enemy, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. So we as Christians are not supposed to take life lightly. There's a big deception going on. I'm going to talk about one of the greatest deceptions. It's about Satan, the dragon, and his fallen angels, demons, have been at work on for a long time in the world today. This topic of dinosaurs is a huge one. So, the great deception is they are willingly ignorant of, by the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water, and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. We're going to talk more about the flood down the road. So, one of the biggest deceptions he's targeting right now is the flood. Why is it that he wants to cover up the flood? Why is it that he's so into this? If he can convince you that the flood is not real, then he can convince you that heaven and hell are not real. And that's why I harped on it so much. Genesis 1 to 11, we have to make sure we're standing on the authority of God's word first. If we're not, we will be deceived. It's not an if, it's not a might. Like if I just add in a little bit of man's word to God's word, you will be deceived. You will go downhill from there. Okay, so what is this? We all know it is, we know the name of it, right? What's the name of this dinosaur? The specific one. Tyrannosaurus Rex, yes. All right. How long ago did many schools teach that this guy lived? Billions of years. They think about 66 to 90 million years ago. Give or take 24 million years. Do you see the sarcasm in my voice? We may be off by 24 million years, that's all. Okay? So we have a range, and we've really narrowed this thing down. So they're very, very certain about what they think, but for some reason we have this buffer in there of 24 million years. So they don't really know. Could they be certain about everything they think they know? See, it comes back to that again. So when was the word dinosaur even invented? So Sir Richard Owen, came up with the name dinosaur in 1841 to describe fossils of huge reptiles, who coined the word by combining the Greek word dinos, which means terrible, and saurus, which means lizard. So there's our terrible lizard. I'm poking fun at this for a reason. We're going to come back to the real definitions. Whenever man comes in and comes up with alternative words, it's completely ridiculous. By the way, as a side note, you're going to look really ignorant if you say dinosaurs and lizards are the same species. I've heard creationists say that. They're not at all. Their skull structure, bone structure is completely different. Do not get into false premises like that. And I could articulate for you the difference, but that's boring, and I'm not going to get into those details. Okay, so what word did they use before 1841? Dragon, that's the ancient word. You guessed it, dragon. There were other words used as well, describing monstrous creatures in ancient times. Serpents, living creatures. The question is, how ancient? So Charles Darwin came up with the idea of evolution less than 200 years ago. So I want you to remember this. This is a very recent idea of evolution. 200 years ago. We invented the first car, automobile, around that same time. Not even 200 years ago. Kind of amazing, isn't it? Why is that important? So let's think about the time for a minute here. All right, so here's our time studying the theory, and this is their proposed time. Now, I tried to give a scale to this, and I can't even begin to compare how thin that thing is. It was so thin you couldn't see it, so I was like, let me just tilt it. And it's like flatter than flat. If I were to like smash 1 million pounds on that thing and flatten that thing, the time studying the theory, it is so tiny compared to their proposed time. Okay? And that's actually, that's their proposed time for just dinosaurs, not even the age of the universe and the Earth. So here there be dragons, right over in this. Have you ever seen that on a map where they say over here on the map, here there be dragons? So this is when dinosaurs lived. This is the proposed age of the Earth. So we're going now we're taking this chunk right here, this lower chunk, and we're going to bring it over here. This is where dinosaurs lived, and this is their proposed age of the Earth. They're 4.5 billion years old. Here there be lies. Do you see how ridiculous our proposition is? With our tiny little 200 years of experience, we know 4.5 billion years of history. I don't believe you, okay? You're going to say with this teeny little speck of time you've had, you understand the history of the universe to a T. You know that for certain. It's so preposterous. It's such a crazy idea. We're just looking at the timeline. So one of the things that we have is, as a study by Answers in Genesis, one of the things that we have is a part of the hip bone or pelvis. How this specimen actually looks like it had come from an animal that looks like it had died 200 or 300 years ago. All dry, chalky, this sort of thing, doesn't actually mean it died 200 or 300 years ago. In Montana, I've seen dinosaur bones that look like they'd come from animals that died 200 or 300 years ago. And I know very well they died much longer than that. This is a secular scientist who did a study. So he's saying, I'm looking at the evidence. It certainly looks like this thing is not very old, but I'm still going to stick with what I originally said. It's this old. Okay? You admitted it, so let's just look at the possibility of it being younger than you think it is. So, there's no way they know that. I think I mentioned this story before, but I remember looking at, sitting in a class, and I had in college, One of my classmates was sitting next to me. He was very smart. He was very good at the geology class. And they were talking about how the earth formed in a perfect shape of a sphere over a long period of time. And he sat and he listened to their story. And he said, there's no way they know this. And I asked him later on, I'm like, you said, there's no way they know this. And he kind of scoffed at it and he said, yeah, there's no way they know that, but the only alternative is creation. And I'm not going to go there. So, what's my point? I think people actually know that this is such a ridiculous story, but they're still going to cling to it because otherwise, there's a God. And if there's a God, then I'm accountable to him. Romans 1:9, I remember that. I keep coming back to this, keep harping on this. Because of which they may be known of God is manifest to them, for God has shown it to them. Now remember, those remote tribes that are out in the middle of nowhere, remember that question that we were asked? There's your answer. It has been shown to them. Since the creation of the world, the invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood through the things which are made, even as eternal power and Godhead, so they're without excuse. They knew God, they would not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became useless in their imaginations. Remember our questions that we go through and we ask? Could you be wrong about everything you think you know? Right? And their foolish heart was darkened. I won't belabor that. So let's get into dragons, dinosaurs in the Bible. Okay, so what do we do with dragons in the Bible? It's not the same definition. It's not the same definition, but the definitions are not consistent. So, dragons and dinosaurs, the definitions don't cross over all the time in the technical names of both of them. But typically the ancient word that you'll see for dragon is going to apply to dinosaurs. I'll keep it simple and explain it that way. If you want to learn more, I'd advise you visit the Creation Museum and go through their Dragon Hall of History. All right. Okay, the image on the top left, that's not a real dragon. Or how come I said the top right? Sorry, top right. That's not a real dragon. That's a mythological being. See, and that's what they've given us a lot of these images of the mythological creature so that we immediately think, oh, myth. The moment I mentioned dragon to you, you thought of a fairy tale, didn't you? Right? Our minds don't go to dinosaurs. So what about the one on the bottom? Now we think, oh, yeah, that actually was there. That definitely was real. Yes, all dinosaurs are dragons. And I believe the dragons and men lived at the same time. Okay? So, I'm going to give some evidence to back that as well. We're going to look at some biblical evidence. We're going to look at some historical evidence. We've already talked about scientific evidence a little bit. This is maybe a little bit too early, but I'm going to be talking about more of the scientific evidence during the flood. But we're going to get into things I'm going to mention more. Okay, so there's that. Any questions before we go forward? Okay. Really, really bad argument. I've heard creationists say this. I don't even believe in dinosaurs. Ah! I don't know. I'm not even going to respond to ridiculous arguments. Okay. So this is an actual. I'm not kidding you. I got this from Eric Hovind. This is an actual newspaper dictionary definition. An old dictionary definition. It says dragon, and it gives the different names on how to pronounce it. Now rare. Describes a dragon as now rare. This is an actual dictionary. The Job 40 talks about, now look at the behemoth, which I made along with you. It eats grass like an ox. See, now his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs like bars of iron. This is dramatic, isn't it? He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can come near his sword. Whatever this is, it's big. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a sneer. So in other words, nothing frightens this thing. So what is the behemoth? What's being described here? Well, we can already tell that whatever this thing is, it's got to be large. Some people think that it's either talking about the crocodile or the hippopotamus. So this is, a lot of your old Earth creationists will bring up these two possibilities. So let's go through each one. I think it's ridiculous, and here's why. Let's read it carefully. So let's just be devil's advocate for the crocodile here. What is a behemoth? Is the first of the ways of God. Only him who made him can bring near his sword. Crocodile, is it that? It's too powerful, right? He eats grass like an ox. Well, it is true, yes, alligators will eat grass, but I think what's getting described here in Job is an herbivore, not a carnivore. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees. Sorry, ain't no way this thing is a crocodile. And a raging river, it's going to sweep away a crocodile. Doesn't matter how big it is, right? So, being the first of the ways of God, if you were to say the first of the ways of God is a crocodile, kind of a weak God. Sorry. We could easily overtake a crocodile. Okay, it must be the hippo. He moves his tail like a cedar. Point made. I don't need to say anything more. When I go to the zoo, people are always smiling at me. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Okay, he moves his tail like a cedar. Do you see the difference here? Whatever this thing is, it's got to be very, very large. Anybody remember what the name of this dinosaur is? I'm blanking at the moment. No. What's the name of this thing? Oh my goodness, it's my favorite dinosaur.
Yeah, Brachiosaurus.
Yes, Brachiosaurus. Yep, Brachiosaurus. And there's another type of it too that is another specific name for it. That's okay. I don't mind looking forgetful. That's fine with me. Oh, sauropod. I had it on there. Sauropod. Yes, sauropod is my favorite because I believe the Bible mentions the actual sauropod. Now, he mentions, behold the behemoth. He probably would not have told him, behold the behemoth, unless he could have beheld the behemoth. So, behold the behemoth. Okay. So, dragons of old, dragons in history. Now, I've studied history, and I will say, if you believe that the Bible is true history, you would probably expect to look back in history and say there should be a lot of record of encountering dinosaurs and dragons. It is unbelievable how much you will find. So, if you are an evolutionist, history is not your friend. History is not your friend. Wouldn't other texts talk about this as well? Guess what? They do. In great abundance. So, here is a petroglyph. This is pictures drawn inside caves. The original, and then they enhanced it with colors and technology. This is in Utah. Okay? Petroglyphs are very common. This famous petroglyph by the Anansi natives, I believe I said that, looks strangely like a sauropod, i.e. dragon or dinosaur. There's another one. Dragon with spines on its back. Lambeosaurus near the Lake Superior in Canada, quite possibly. Have you ever seen anything like that running around in North America? Interesting, isn't it? Native American pictograph in San Rafael, Swell, Utah, and USA. Here are some. These are a controversial one. Are you familiar with the Inca stones? Okay, I actually saw one, a physical one, in person. The Inca stones are found at an ancient grave site in Peru, and they became very controversial because a lot of the natives there discovered, hey, tourists are going to come and buy these stones if we start making a bunch of fake ones. So they're a bit more on the controversial side, not as good of evidence because they think that there's a lot of fake ones mixed in with the real ones. I know that a lot of creationists use these, but I thought I'd add some controversial ones in there as well, just for sake of argument. This is a better one. This relief in Angkor, Cambia, is something like a stegosaurus. And the stegosaurus, this is a pretty strong one. Evolutionists respond with ancient people must have found the fossils, drawn pictures of what they found there. So this is actually an argument I ran across in a lot of my teaching as an educator, because they go, oh, well, they drew pictures about this. They wrote stories about it. Maybe they just found the bones. These are pretty good drawings for that. If you look at some of our early illustrations of dinosaurs, before we found the complete skeletons, they're sad, man. Look it up. It's very interesting history. There's a big problem with that. There's lots of historical documentations of encounters with dragons. And when I say historical, I mean it's actual history. It's not just, oh, this is another myth or another legend. I'll give you examples. So again, we got the Bible. It talks about things like the Leviathan or the Behemoth. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand upon him, remember the battle, never do it again. So this is the Bible's little bit of sense of humor. In other words, if at first you don't succeed, don't try skydiving. That's what it's saying, ultimately. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. So one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. So, some sort of a sea creature. Who can open the doors of his face with terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are his pride. That dog scared the liver of him. The Leviathan running around out there. That no air can come between them. They are, what did I miss here? Okay, his rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly with a seal. One is so near to another that no one can come between them. In other words, it's like armor on it. They are joined one to another. They stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like eyelids of the morning. This is very interesting. So the fire-breathing dragon, listen to this. Out of his mouth go burning light, sparks of fire shoot out. What? The Bible talks about this? You gotta be kidding me. Smoke goes up from its nostrils as a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out from his mouth. So, fire-breathing dragons. The Bible endorses it. Interesting. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him and cannot be moved. So many of the legends of dragons, they have one thing in common. Fire. Fire breathing. This is not the mythological picture that they've tried to stick in your head, like this. It's different. They have models out there. You can look this up on different creation sites about different bombard beetles that are able to spit acid and burn. They think there might have been some sort of a similar mechanism in dragons. It's theoretical because we can't directly observe it. And I'm going to talk about historical and observational science. But they think there is a plausible possibility that they were to spark something in their mouth with their teeth, and they breathed out heavy gases, it would appear that they're breathing out fire. Right? So there's models and ideas of this. A lot of them are theoretical, not proven. So I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though a sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. one would think the deep had white hair. It's kind of artistic, isn't it, the way it describes it. On earth there's nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. Now, thinking back to the behemoth of it, said that he was one of the greatest ways of God. Well, the behemoth seems to have some sort of leg up on Leviathan. So, again, I'm emphasizing, these things are big. What in the world are you going to say these things are? Dragon legends are not exclusively in the Bible. If the Bible's true, you'd expect to find dragon legends all over the earth. And guess what you find? Dragon legends. These stories are found everywhere. We'll look into some more historic documentations, but I'm going to recommend a book for you. This is Dragons by Bodhi Hodge. He did some research on dragons and history, and he goes through and he lists a whole bunch of them, both mythological ones and real ones. And this is quite an interesting book, because if you go through it, it's got these interactive things like in Babylon, Greece, China. You can open it up and look at these different envelopes and see all these different stories. We're going to talk about this one. This one's really cool. But yeah, this book, it's got a whole bunch of interactive pages. You're like, well, it looks like a kid's book. It's not a kid's book. It's very interactive and, yeah, very, very interesting. Do you own it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's quite good.
Yeah. So, recommendation for you, Dragons. Legends and Lore of Dinosaurs. You can pick it up at the Creation Museum, too. Okay, so let's look at some of this history. How much time do we have left? 15 minutes? Marco Polo. How many of you have played Marco Polo, the game? He's actually a real historical explorer, and he wrote a lot of history for us. So he saw dragons, and he wrote about them. And they're like, oh, well, how are we going to explain this away? Skeptics have gone through some of these, and their arguments don't hold up. In his travels, Marco Polo described some of these long, lanky, what he called serpents, and which included short legs and claws, and he claimed the Chinese could use special methods to kill them. So that's one method. The serpents and dragons was common, back and forth between the two. Here's what he writes. Here are found snakes and huge serpents, 10 paces in length, 10 spans in girth. That is 50 feet long and 100 inches in the girth. Whoa. So think about that. If we had time, I would grab a tape measure and we would start measuring the length of this. It's big.
It's bigger.
Yeah, it is huge. And the forepart, near the head, it has 2 short legs, each with 3 claws. So, it's interesting, isn't it? Because some skeptics said it's an alligator. Alligators don't have 3 claws. So, interesting, isn't it? This is history. This is your recorded history. Marco Polo Part 2. As well as eyes larger than a loaf, very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man or any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others smaller in size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces long. Wow. Cool, isn't it?
We have an encounter with the Romans. And the Romans, we have some old writings. There was a number of times that they actually encountered a dragon. I don't want to go into too much detail with this, but here was one that's a dragon that suddenly crept up behind a Roman army. The leader's like, kill it. So they basically took it out, and they actually measured it. And once they'd skinned it, and they sent the skin actually back to the Senate, it measured at 120 feet long, and the thickness and its width was about the same by the time they had it skinned. So we see a number of these, some of them as late as the 4th century AD. So, I mean, we find these all over the place. So cultures all over the world really were encountering dinosaur dragon-like creatures. Now, I want you to notice, this particular dragon, at the end of it, was killed. And we see this with a number of these. In fact, you look at most dragon legends around the world, most of them ended with a dragon getting killed. Now, think about that. what happens to a population of dragons? These are in many instances, these were fearful creatures. People were scared of them. And a lot of times when the fear is bred, they wanted to wipe them out. That's just kind of what's happened throughout history. So, it wouldn't surprise me if mankind was heavily involved in the extinction of these particular dinosaurs and dragons.
And you're probably going to hear me say this again later on. My opinion is they are extinct now. They're gone. I know that there are some strange theories out there that they're still out there being hit around it. Quite frankly, I just don't believe it, just because I think that there's a lot of lacking evidence there. But I would have to see every corner of the earth all at once, every single remote jungle, to know for sure that they aren't there anymore. But historically speaking, every story of a dragon, how does it end? Kill it, right? You slay the dragon. That's just what you do. You see the dragon, you slay it. It'd be kind of like if a grizzly bear came wandering into Colcado. Every redneck and their rusty pickup would be rolling into town with a shotgun, right? So that's just what we do. Big animal, kill it, right? That's man's mentality. St. George and the Dragon. This is a very, very famous one, which you've probably heard already. How many are familiar with this? It's oftentimes presented as a fairy tale, but it's written as a historical document. It's interesting the double standard that these historians or these evolutionists have. They'll say, this piece of history right here, even though they were recording real history, this was real history. And then they told a story about a dragon. And then they continued on with their history. But the story about the dragon was pretend. You see the double standard there? We'll keep this in this, but we'll throw out the evidence we don't like. Okay. So this is the most famous one, 200 AD. While in the military, George came across a village of Selene in northern Africa in the province of Libya. It was a pagan village, and they had been terrorized by this dragon that had taken up residence in a pond near town. In hopes of appeasing the dragon, their pagan gods, to relinquish this terror, the townsfolk began sacrificing sheep to it, 2 per day, and to no avail. They were continuing to give out too many sheep, and the hungry dragon wanted more and more and kept on terrorizing. So the pagan people, by city ordinance, began casting lots to sacrifice their children and youths to this thing. So now we're just going to feed our children to it, which is nothing new. That's a demonic message. If you destroy your children, life is going to be better for you. We're going to talk more about that down the road. So they were hoping to appease the gods by sacrificing the children. They began sacrificing their children in hopes to save lives better. Kind of similar to the abortion issue today, which we're going to talk about a bit. I know it's controversial, but we're still going to do it. The lot fell on the Selene king's daughter. So now the princess is going to be offered to this dragon. Okay? You know how many legends there are about the knight saving the princess from the dragon. This is where it comes from. This is actual history. It was when St. George was passing by the town and inquired of the princess what was happening as she awaited for her fate with the dragon. So he finds her there. What's going on? Why are you waiting here? And while they were speaking, the dragon came. George took out his sword and spear and, on horseback, charged the dragon, striking it with his spear. And he didn't kill it, he just hurt it. So George took up the wounded dragon, tied a harness around its neck, and brought the defeated beast back to the village. Then he killed the dragon in front of the king and the people, and he preached Jesus Christ to these pagans, and they repented and received Christ. And to the account, it was about 15,000 men that were baptized and made a profession of faith. You never heard that part of the story, did you? So that's unless you have read similar articles and stories that I have. How are we doing? We giving you enough? Should we pause there and maybe come back to some more of it later on? What have we got more? Oh, the desert. Oh, this is my favorite one. We're going to come back to the desert monster. This is a very recent one. So, okay.